What is up? What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel, to the podcast. And today we are going to talk Seattle Seahawks head coaching search. As it would appear that it's winding down, I would assume by next week we should have an answer as to who the next Seahawks head coach is. I'm sure they would like to wrap it up because the quicker you can get your head coach, the quicker you can get your staff and get everything rolling. Before we know it, draft's going to be here and everything's going to be rocking and rolling for 2024. Before I get started and dive into this, do me a favor. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button. And if you're new here or you've been here a while, hit the like button. Both help me out tremendously. Drop a comment too. Let me know who you want the Seattle Seahawks to hire as a head coach. It's left to the Seahawks and the Commanders, the only two teams that do not currently have a head coach. And it's been a while since Seattle's been in this position. Truthfully, maybe back in the 90s, because when they hired Pete Carroll, it was like the day they fired Jim Mora, reports came out that they wanted Pete Carroll. Jim Mora was promoted from Holmgren's staff as the successor. And I'll be honest, I know when Dennis Erickson was fired, I don't remember when Holmgren was hired relative to Erickson's firing. So at least in the last 25 years, this is the first time we have been through this. So unless you're an older fan, and I consider myself a little older, this is new to a lot of us. So far we've got the Falcons have gone with Raheem Morris, who is a candidate for the Seattle job. Raiders are sticking with Antonio Pierce, which makes sense. Titans went with Brian Callahan, the Bengals OC, which I don't know if I don't think he ever interviewed with Seattle. There were some mentions of his name, but they're going Brian Callahan. Makes sense to work with Will Levis. Patriots promoted Gerard Mayo. Chargers are bringing Jim Harbaugh back to the NFL, not back to the Chargers. Well, yeah, he did play for the Chargers for a little bit, so you could say back. What else am I missing here? Did I get all of them? I feel like I'm missing one. The Falcons, Morris, and then the Panthers went with former Seahawks coach and former Bucs offensive coordinator Dave Canales. So the Commanders and Seahawks are the only two that remain. It's hard not to look at this and think that, and again, this is just my take on it. You guys might think differently, but it's hard not to look at this and think that the Seahawks aren't wanting a coach that's coaching right now and can't take the job until after Sunday, right? And I know Dan Quinn's been brought up a lot. I think he's actually still, if you go to some betting sites, the favorite to get the job. And I've mentioned Dan Quinn. That was the first name that kind of popped into my mind when Pete was stepped down, let go, whatever you want to call it, mutually agreed to part ways. I think for most of us, Dan Quinn's just kind of the first name that popped up, right? I mean, I would say for probably not everybody, but for most of us, like, oh yeah, Dan Quinn, that seems like a pretty logical choice to take over for Pete Carroll in Seattle. I still like Dan Quinn. I don't think it would be a terrible hire, judging by the poll that I made a few weeks ago. I think most of you probably might disagree with that. I don't think it's the sexiest hire, but I'd be okay with Dan Quinn being the head coach of the Seahawks. And I'll get more into Quinn if they make that hire. I don't want to make a whole video on Dan Quinn and then he doesn't get the job. And it's like, I don't want to say waste of time, but I don't think Quinn's a terrible hire. I think it's a safe hire. I don't know how much upside there's, but again, I'll get into Quinn if they hire Quinn. But anyways, the point I'm making with that is if they wanted Dan Quinn and they were enamored with Dan Quinn, and one of the reasons why they wanted to move on from Pete is because they thought they might not get a chance to bring Dan Quinn in to coach the staff, then why haven't they hired Dan Quinn? Like I've said Dan Quinn now 77 times in the first 3 minutes, but they would have hired him already, right? Now, I think there is legitimate interest. They interviewed him twice. John knows Quinn, obviously. So I do think there's mutual, and I think Dan Quinn would want the Seattle job out of all the jobs, just based on what I've heard and read and everything like that. But the Cowboys were knocked out, 2 weeks ago now? Essentially, because we're at Friday, so it'll be 2 weeks ago. I mean, if their plan from day one was, man, Quinn's our guy, then you could have hired him 2 weeks ago, more than likely. Now, he's doing some interview rounds too, so it's possible that Quinn wants to go do more interviews. But at this point, I think he would have taken the Seattle job pretty quickly. So that doesn't mean that they don't like Dan Quinn or that Dan Quinn won't be the head coach, but I think it's pretty clear that that's just not that Dan Quinn wasn't just there, oh, this is our guy, we're going after him, and nothing else. like the Patriots knew right away. They promoted Gerard Mayo. Now, Quinn's not on the Seahawks staff, can just promote him right away. But had they been enamored with Quinn and he was their guy, I feel like they just would have made the hire by now, right? And maybe I'm wrong on that, but it feels to me like they want either Ben Johnson or Mike McDonald, and that's why they haven't made a move yet. At the head coaching position. Now, there's a couple things to remember with this. One, like both candidates, I think Ben John. Let me go. Let me take a step back. Step back for a minute. I think a lot of what you want for this team as a head coach depends on what direction this team wants to go in, right? Like, do they want to roll it back with Geno and think, hey, the offense was, maybe just needs some things cleaned up, need to be a little more consistent, and we need to get this defense in shape. If that's the case, then, you may want a more defensive-minded head coach. But if this is a team that wants to draft a quarterback and maybe hit the reset button a little bit, then it would seem more likely you'd want to go with an offensive coach to work with that young quarterback. And that way you don't have to worry about, if you go with a defensive coach and you get a young quarterback, it can work, but you might have an offensive coordinator that gets a head coaching job. Like the Texans is a good example of that, with CJ Stroud. DeMeco Ryans is a defensive background head coach. If they're good again next year, Bobby Slowick, their offensive coordinator, is going to be gone. Now, that doesn't mean that CJ Stroud's going to fail, but it does put a lot of pressure on a head coach and a young quarterback when you're losing offensive coordinators. Now, once the quarterback is, reach their maturity, maybe in year 4 or 5, and you kind of know what they are, then I think it's less of an issue because it's just like, hey, this guy's good. You could have me calling the plays and this quarterback will make it work. Patrick Mahomes, you could have anybody as that OC. He's going to be a good quarterback, for you. So anyways, I'm getting a little off topic there. So I think that's part of it too. We don't really know what direction this team wants to go in. Either way, I like McDonald and I like Ben Johnson, both up and coming coaches that you would think that are going to be head coaches in this league very soon. Remember this though, and this is just a word of caution. It takes 2 to tango with these things. It is very possible, and it's been pretty rumored that the Commanders really like Ben Johnson, and he's kind of been their guy from the get-go that they've been after. And it may be easy for us as Seahawks fans to sit there and go, well, Seattle's got the better stadium, better facilities. You would think maybe better front office, better ownership. I don't really know the new Commanders ownership too well. So to us, we go, well, why wouldn't Ben Johnson want to come here? Well, the Commanders have the number 2, 3 pick in the draft? I'm not even sure where they're at. I'm not going to look it up. It doesn't really matter. But if Ben Johnson goes to Washington, he is going to get to handpick a quarterback that he can mold, work with, and sort of start his head coaching career with. In Seattle, that's not a guarantee. Now, they could get a quarterback, but you are not going to necessarily get your pick of a quarterback. It may have to be settling for someone that you like but don't love. So that could weigh in very heavily for Ben Johnson, and he could pick the Commanders. I like Mike McDonald a lot. I asked a question on Twitter a few weeks ago. Do you want, and I think both candidates here kind of go with both directions, what I'm going to say. Do you want the next Kyle Shanahan or Sean McVay, or do you want to find a coach that can stop Kyle Shanahan and Sean McVay? And I don't think there's a right or wrong answer to it. I really don't. The trend of the NFL is going with offensive head coaches, so you don't lose those offensive coordinators with a young quarterback like I was just talking about. But I'm not against going defense and trying to get someone out there that can really slow down these offenses and then hiring a good OC that can maybe get this offense, which I don't think was bad last year, but cleaned up and a little more consistent. And that could absolutely be Mike McDonald. We saw what he did to San Francisco this year. The Rams put up some points on, but again, like we see, you watch the film, you see how innovative Mike McDonald is with some of these blitzes and what he's been doing with Baltimore. So it'd be super exciting. Mike McDonald may choose to stay in Baltimore. I wouldn't be totally shocked, and I'm not trying to start a rumor here or anything. Again, this is just, everything I'm saying is pure speculation by me, just so you guys know. So don't take any of this as like, ooh, there's some insight. I'm speculating on everything here. It's all we have, right? Is speculation. I wouldn't be totally shocked if Baltimore wins the Super Bowl if John Harbaugh retired. I mean, he's been there for 16 years. It would be his second Lombardi trophy. His brother's coming back in the league. Not that he would retire because of that, but just with all that going on, it wouldn't be the craziest thing ever if he walked away. And Mike Macdonald would be a very logical choice to take over. Maybe that's not happening this year. Maybe there's been some talks. So it's very possible that Mike Macdonald decides to pass on the job. And I'm just bringing that up because if we see something next week where Seattle does go with Dan Quinn, it might not be that they didn't go hard after Ben Johnson and Mike Macdonald. In fact, I think it's pretty fair to say that they are waiting for one of those two. That's my gut. I mean, it just feels that way. And Dan Quinn may actually kind of be their fallback a little bit. I wouldn't be shocked at that at all if they're kind of feeling it out, seeing if Johnson or Macdonald would take the job. And if they don't, they may roll back and decide to go with Dan Quinn. In fact, that's my prediction for what's going to happen. So that's why I think Quinn's kind of still on the radar. I think they prefer Johnson or Macdonald. Truthfully, and Mike Holmgren said that he thinks John would like to hire Ben Johnson. But again, I think the Commanders want Johnson as well. And again, he may choose that job. He's going to get his quarterback handpicked there. So it may be something that they go with. And I believe, didn't Washington hire one of the guys from the 49ers front office to be their GM? That may be a very good pairing in Washington. This is also a tough situation because we've never seen John Schneider hire a head coach. It's crazy. John's been here for what? This will be 14, 15 years. And, it was Pete that hired John. Pete got the job first. And crazy enough, John's outlasted Pete in Seattle. And John was in Green Bay, and we saw, the coaches that they went with. And I'll get to that in a minute here with another little bit of speculation. But we really don't know. Like, it would be one thing if this was John's second or third head coach hiring, where we could have a little bit more idea of maybe which way he's leaning or what he likes to do. But we really don't. We've never had John do this for us and hire a head coach. So, and Seattle's always also on top of that, really the Seattle Seahawks organization. The last 3 head coaching hirings they've made have been big names. And I'm not saying these names are small, but Seattle seems to be going with promoting the coordinator. They could still go with like a Mike Vrabel or someone, Bill Belichick is out there. I think that's a 0% chance of happening, but it is still out there. But last hiring was Pete Carroll, big name in college. Noises going on out there. Clearly that was the guy they wanted. They wanted Pete Carroll. You know what I mean? There was no hesitation. I know Jim Mora was in between there. I'm going to kind of dismiss that. And, Paul Allen did the right thing and just moved on from that. But Mike Holmgren, a big name. Dennis Erickson was a huge name. If you guys don't remember, he's head coach at Miami College and national championship winner. That was not a light hiring. Even Tom Flores before Erickson was a Super Bowl winning coach with the Raiders. So Seattle has not done the getting the young coordinator or coordinator hire before. They've kind of gone with more proven head coaches in the past, outside of Mora, who was I guess he did have head coaching experience, but he wasn't coming off a head coaching stint, if that makes sense. Neither was Flores, but I think you guys know what I'm trying to get at here. So this is all kind of new. So it's really hard to get a gauge on what they want. John did mention in the press conference about if you go with the defensive coach, you do run that risk of losing the OC to another team. Mike Holmgren, like I said, he mentioned Ben Johnson. Holmgren's been pretty tapped into this. I think him and John are fairly close. Now, I doubt John's just spilling everything to Mike Holmgren, but I don't think Holmgren's take of John wanting Ben Johnson is completely crazy. I think that probably is, but I think there is the Washington competition. Washington's going hard for him, and it may be where he prefers to go. So that is definitely a possibility. Another hire that I would keep an eye out, like I said, I guess to put it into just to simplify it, I think they want Johnson and Macdonald. I think that's why they're waiting. If they weren't, why haven't they just made a hire yet? You know what I mean? Like, why wait, I guess. Again, there's 100 little things that could be going on behind the scenes that we don't know. But again, to me, it just feels like if they weren't waiting, they would have made the hire. I would say the same thing for Washington. They've been rumored to love Ben Johnson from the start, and and they haven't made a hire. Now, it'll be interesting because Washington also brought in Dan Quinn for a third interview. If Washington goes with Quinn here, let's say tonight, tomorrow, or something, then I think Ben Johnson will be the Seahawks head coach, because I would imagine Washington maybe heard something that Seattle was the front runner. Seattle has interviewed Ben Johnson. They have not interviewed Mike Macdonald. Now, Corbin Smith of Locked On Seahawks made a point that when Seattle fired Pete, or, whatever you want to call it, we'll just say fired Pete. It was 3 days after the season ended, and they weren't able to put in an official request with Macdonald or something. I don't know how all the rules work with it. I guess I could have dove into it more, but I'm just, talking about the head coaching search here. So it's still not out of the question they could get Macdonald. But they haven't actually even interviewed him yet. They have interviewed Ben Johnson. And the reason I also speculate that Macdonald could stay in Baltimore is he didn't get a ton of interviews, if I'm not mistaken. I think Atlanta put in a request for Macdonald, and did Tennessee? I don't think a lot of teams put in a request for Mike Macdonald, which, it could be a couple things. Maybe teams don't think he is qualified. I mean, we can look at the numbers and look at the X's and O's, but me and you aren't interviewing these guys, so we don't really know what they're saying. There might be stuff they're saying that you go, ooh, I don't know about that if you're a GM. So, I don't know. I could see Macdonald staying in Baltimore, and it wouldn't totally shock me if Harbaugh retired, and maybe that's why his name hasn't come up quite as much. But anyways, going back to John Schneider a little bit. One interesting hire that I'm sure he had some say in was in 2000. Let me actually pull it up here real quick. When was John in Green Bay all the way through? Because, I don't want to do this and then find out. Not John Schneider, American actor. John Schneider, GM. There we go. All right, I just want to check this out real quick, because he was with Green Bay. What years was he with the Packers here? Let me just get this official. Okay, so I pulled it up. John was a scout with Green Bay from 93 to 96, and then top personnel A to general manager 02 to 07. That's what I thought. I just want to confirm. So the hire they made during that time was Mike McCarthy. Mike McCarthy was the offensive coordinator of a bad 49ers team in 2005. And got the head coaching gig for the Packers. Now, listen, we can make jokes about Mike McCarthy all we want. I know, people have with him staying in Dallas, but I mean, if Seattle hired a coach and he had the career with Seattle that Mike McCarthy had in Green Bay, that's a successful hire. I'm sorry, it is. Mike McCarthy won a Lombardi and was a very, very successful head coach with Green Bay. If you told me right now, Jay, you can take right now, Seattle's next head coach will have the exact same success in Seattle that Mike McCarthy had in Green Bay, I'd sign up for that in a second. And I'm reaching here a little bit, but hiring an OC from a team that wasn't very good offensively, but had a pedigree and a background, could it be Mike Kafka as a little sleeper too? Now, again, they could have just hired Kafka if they wanted to, already. But I do wonder if maybe he's there. I talked about Dan Quinn being their fallback option. Maybe it's Mike Kafka as well if they don't get Ben Johnson. It's funny. In my, I don't know if it was in my season ending video or in my Pete Carroll video, but I joked around kind of. I was like, hey, you're going to get interviews with guys that are big names. Dan Quinn's a big name. Ben Johnson's a popular name. Raheem Morris, Patrick Graham, all these guys, kind of Mike Vrabel, big name coaches. I said, don't also be surprised if there's some other coaches in there. And I even mentioned Mike Kafka, like someone from a bad team that, don't let that just make you think that that's a bad hire because the Giants offense wasn't good. Kafka's interesting. He comes from the Andy Reid tree. He's worked with quarterbacks, so he's got a quarterback pedigree. Listen, I know the Giants offense was not good. To some extent, I don't think there's anything he could do there. And truthfully, when he was the OC the year before, they had the best year of Daniel Jones's career. He made Daniel Jones look good for a year. That says something. And it's more about the pedigree and the background of Kafka coming from that Andy Reid tree. He could be a fallback option as well. It would not totally shock me. So my thought process on it is this. I think they want Johnson or Macdonald. I think that's their choice. That's their top choices. And I think now that there's only 2 jobs open, they're willing to take a step back and wait on this. I actually think it's a very good thing for the Seahawks that everybody else kind of made their decisions, because now they can kind of wait it out. They could look at it like, listen, if Washington hires Dan Quinn, then fine, we get Ben Johnson. If Washington hires Ben Johnson, then we can go after Mike Macdonald. If Washington somehow goes after Mike Macdonald, we can go get Ben Johnson. And if Washington gets Ben Johnson, Macdonald doesn't want to work with you, then you do have Quinn and Kafka available as well. So my guess would be it's one of the 4. You're either going to see Ben Johnson, Mike Macdonald, Dan Quinn, or Mike Kafka. There's 2 question marks. There's more than 2 question marks. It's, what does this team want to do? Does this team look at Geno and the current offense and say, listen, full healthy season of Charles Cross, Abe Lucas, we invest a little bit in the interior offensive line, hope they stay healthy. We just need to polish up the offense a little bit, get a little more consistent. And the offense was pretty good with Geno and company. We need to fix the defense. The defense was a mess. It was atrocious. Pittsburgh came in with Mason Rudolph and destroyed us. If that's the case, they may lean defensive coach. That may be Dan Quinn or Mike Macdonald. If they're a team that's saying, hey, we want to get a young quarterback in here, we like Geno, we want to develop a quarterback that, we know John is like Mahomes, like Josh Allen. He wanted to trade Russ earlier than Pete did. So John may be enamored with a quarterback that he thinks he can get. And if that's the case, then it may be Ben Johnson or Mike Kafka as your options for that. So, and I would be clear too, that doesn't mean that if they go with Kafka and Johnson, stick with Geno and try to rebuild the defense, that's a bad idea. And it doesn't mean that if they go with Quinn or Macdonald and draft a quarterback, that that's doomed to fail either. It can work either way. But to me, it's like, if you want the quarterback, then you got to go this path. If you want to just improve the defense, and maybe go this path. That's my take on it. I'd be fine with all 4. I think there's reason to be optimistic about all of them. I would prefer Johnson or Macdonald. I think they've just shown a little bit more. I should say Macdonald probably hasn't shown more than Dan Quinn, but I think he's just a little, the unknown makes it a little more exciting, I think, in my opinion, for Macdonald. I think that, we've seen Dan Quinn as a head coach, and I don't think his Atlanta tenure was as bad as some people make it out to be. I mean, they were one more first down away from Dan Quinn hoisting a Lombardi trophy. Now, he didn't. They blew it. Quinn deserves some blame for that, for sure. And, but had he won that Lombardi, he's probably still in Atlanta just on merit from that Super Bowl. You know what I mean? So, while I don't think I'd call Quinn's tenure in Atlanta a success, I don't think it was just a complete failure either. He took over a team that was really bad in his second year, gone to Super Bowl. I know it was mostly Kyle Shanahan, but Quinn hired Shanahan. So Quinn may have a good eye for coaching talent. His leadership's respected. And coaches can get better in their second tenure. Bill Belichick, Pete Carroll. So, and I'm not making this video to make it like a Dan Quinn rant. I'd still prefer Macdonald or Johnson. Again, I think they're a little more unknown, but a little more exciting. I think Quinn would feel a little bit kind of that retreadish hire, but I'm not against it either. I'm not. I think Quinn can learn and can get better and can be a good head coach. I am oddly intrigued by Mike Kafka just because the Giants offense was the fact that the Giants offense was that bad and he's getting a head coaching interview is almost in a way a good sign for me, if that makes any sense whatsoever. Like, it's easy to find the number one offense and be like, that's the coach we want. But if there's someone you like that's on a bad offense, I don't know, just kind of intriguing. I like his Andy Reid background. That really gets me pumped up. So, I'd be fine with that. Again, my pecking order would probably be, if you guys want it, Johnson number 1, although I do think the Commanders might get him, but I would love Ben Johnson in here. Macdonald's number 2. I said McDonald's, like we're going to get a burger. Quinn Kafka, to me, it's kind of like one we kind of know, one we don't. I think I'd put Quinn 3rd, Kafka 4th, but I'm almost more intrigued by Kafka in a way, if that makes any sense whatsoever. And they might not even hire one of those guys. For all we know, knowing my luck and how inaccurate my takes are sometimes, there's probably an alert they just hired Mike Vrabel, for all I know. So who knows? That's what I think it is. So just to sum it up, first of all, thank you guys for watching. If you got this far, subscribe, like the video as well. I think they want Johnson or Macdonald. And I think now that every team outside of Washington has hired somebody, I think Quinn, Kafka are kind of their fallback options. If Johnson goes to Washington, Macdonald stays in Baltimore. Last thing I'll say is just remember, if they don't get Johnson or Macdonald, it may be something out of their control. That may be not their fault. Now, if they don't get them and Johnson and Macdonald go on to be huge successes and Quinn or Kafka is a failure, that doesn't mean that that's an excuse for John and company, right? They've got to get it right, regardless of other reasons. It's their job to nail the hiring. So I also don't want to be like, oh, well, it's not their fault Mike Kafka stunk as a head coach. They couldn't get Ben Johnson. No, they've still got to get it right. But it is very possible those guys choose, Johnson chooses to go to Washington, or maybe Macdonald does. And I more than likely see Johnson going to Washington and Macdonald staying in Baltimore. So we'll see. We'll find out. We'll find out soon enough. And hopefully whoever it is, I'm willing to give whoever it is a shot just because we don't know John's history with hiring head coaches. Like I said earlier, if this was John's second or third hire, I'd probably be more a little skeptical of it. But this is kind of his first. So whoever it is, I think there's reasons to be optimistic, and I will give whoever it is a shot. That doesn't mean that we can't be critical, but I'm willing to give whoever the new head coach is a chance. Have a great night, everybody. Enjoy your weekend. Take care, and go Hawks. Love you guys. Later.